Everyone. Claude and we are going to do a short presentation on training First Nation building officers. We've received a number of requests on what's happened in the past, where we are now, and where we plan to go in terms of availability of training for First Nations. And this has always been an interesting topic because the whole training issue was really the start of FNNBOA to address the issue of training. So we have an overview. So today we are going to focus on, next slide there, the history of training, occupational standards, relationship with municipal building officials, also relationship with home inspectors. Hopefully Claude can talk about that. Alliance of Canadian Building Officials Associations, and the role of certifications. So FNNBOA, this was the main reason back in 2020, in 2003, that we formed the association. There was a lack of training. We couldn't get access to Part 9 training. There was one province, for example, we tried to get training for Part 9s with municipal building officials, and we could never get in. Some would argue it was, they weren't overly accommodating to First Nations. So it was hard getting access. So as part of the association, we identified several key initiatives to develop our training. And the focus was we wanted the First Nation building officer, which is actually we own as a trademark, where a municipal building official is for municipal guys, but we wanted to, develop better training, better skills, better knowledge towards First Nations that specifically are working within the communities. So the challenge associated with the training was there was no access to national or provincial building codes. We had limited access to private courses. There was NAIT and SAIT delivered some courses back at the time, but it was not a really much available. Next, please. So one of the first activities that we did was we conducted a national occupational standard. And this was developed in 2003. And I believe, Claude, this is where we met, wasn't it? On the National Occupational Standard development?
Yes, that's exactly where we met, way
Yeah.
back at the beginning of the occupational standards.
Yeah. So what happened was I was involved in a project where we were developing national occupational standards for municipal building officials and a national occupational standards for the home inspection sector. And this was and my job at the time was to basically project manage, and this is about the late 1990s, if I recall. And so with that happening, we decided we also needed to develop a national occupational standards for the First Nation building officer. And as I mentioned, we own that trademark. And they were developed by industry professionals that describe the skills, the knowledge, and the abilities required to perform the duties of someone inspecting on reserve. So basically what we did, we took the municipal building officials, we took the home inspector, national occupation, and we put them together, and then we revamped it to cater towards people providing on reserve services. And it could be used for a variety of purposes. It was used for basic develop training, curriculum development, set up accreditation, training programs, performance measures, how to develop a career in the era of to become a First Nation building officers. And this was developed with another steering group, which was the Canadian Home Inspectors and Building Officials Steering Committee of the National Occupational Standards. Again, I was project managing this, and this is actually how we got involved with First Nations. Was I knew I was involved with the municipal and the home inspection sector, and they asked if I would come and help with the First Nations. Okay. We also, back in 1995, believe it or not, was the development of the NICI inspection training. It was developed by CMHC, specifically geared towards CMHC housing, Section 95, Section 10 constructions. The objective of NICI was to provide greater First Nation involvement inspections of the CMHC program and to help build First Nations inspection capacity. They built it because, you know, they knew back then it was the importance of the quality of the house. One of the challenges of the NICI, well, the good thing about it is they had a number of training courses, training seminars, and they were actually instrumental. Alain Croteau at the time, they were very instrumental in helping to develop FNNBOA. So CMHC developed the program, but what happened? There was a lot of inconsistencies among the regions, inconsistencies of requirements. There was confusion regarding they had mandatory technical qualifications. There was no standards of training or evaluation. And it became really a challenge between what became a certified inspector versus a qualified inspector. So it raised a lot of, it was great, but it raised a lot of challenges. And what's also interesting is the training were also used for people to provide residential rehabilitation assistance programs or the RAP program as well. To date, NICI does not exist. There's remnants of it. People still make reference to it, but I believe that it no longer is part of a program. Then from the NICI inspection, we went into a certification. Next slide there, Claude. Back in 2005, we tried to establish an independent certification council. We hired an independent consultant, and the framework that we used was probably one of the best frameworks. I know it was adapted for the home inspections and for the municipal guys. It was well grounded. We had a registrar who was actually Claude. He was probably one of the first working with us. We had 3 levels. It was based on national occupational standards. And what was great about it was it was able to get consistency in terms of training, reliability in terms of where your skill gaps were. It helped to provide, you know, a better uniformity of performance among First Nation building officials. Go ahead. However, we canceled the certification program. We spent enormous resources and time and energy, but we canceled it because at the end of the day, we could not get the inspectors to do the uptake. And basically, inspectors thought if we were not going to get further pay, we're not going to do the certification. And it sort of baffled many of us, it still baffles us today, that, you know, you would think you would want to take the additional training to make sure you're up to speed, so you get the training, and we could not get the uptake by the inspectors. Many felt there was no need or incentive to become certified. Chief and councils didn't make it a requirement. They said, well, we'll just continue with the inspectors. We don't care if you're certified, qualified, we don't care your background. Well, it was paid by CMHC. They didn't support the certification program. INAC didn't support the program either. Again, they helped fund it, but they didn't make it a requirement. And basically what happened, FNNBOA was taking on the liability, our register was taking on liability. There was a substantial cost for it to continue. And we also had to develop a whole program to recertify all the existing inspectors. So we, after a major review, we decided to drop it. Go ahead. And what we did in turn was we actually then formed a relationship with all the municipal building officials across Canada. And as part of that agreement, they opened up and said, yes, we can help provide training. You get access to our training courses. It's still up to the chief and council to determine the degree of certification. And CMHC started continuing with their own requirements for qualifications versus certification. But from our perspective, at least we were able to work with municipal building officials, and those would be like OBOA, Ontario, and New Brunswick, and BC, and Alberta building officials. And they formed an association called the Alliance of Canadian Building Officials Association, and we are actually members of that. And because we're members, we're been input in terms of helping specialized training and certification and training. Clyde, do you want to add anything on some of that as well? Because we don't have a big relationship with the home inspectors, though.
No, and that's a good point. I think one of the things that did come out of the occupational standards for all three, certainly First Nation, municipal building officials, and certainly the home inspectors, was a document called the Common Core. So there's a lot of, we'll say, overlap of similar type of, we'll say, inspection responsibilities. And so that really was a very interesting document that really shows there is a common thread between all three. The unfortunate part is when it comes to the home inspectors, it's certainly a little bit different, because in a lot of cases, the home inspectors are certainly, in majority of cases, vast majority, really private inspectors without the, we'll call it the legal responsibility, or we'll call it even legal, we'll say, enforcement of the municipal building officials. So a lot of the home inspectors are really focusing on trying to protect home buyers, or even in some cases, even home sellers. So it's kind of an awkward situation, because although there's been some comparative with some First Nation actual inspectors, there is certainly some commonality and overlap. So there is a difference. Unfortunately, there's a distinct difference, but there are areas where I believe some of the First Nation building officers, and even First Nation inspectors in general, probably could meet some of the certification requirements that is in the occupational standard requirements as far as the home inspection side. So it's not quite as clear cut. Certainly it's on an individual basis. And even going back to what John was saying earlier with FNNBOA, and to receive the FNNBOA certification, each person would have to individually bring forward sort of their experience, and certainly do prior learning experience review. So there was a fair amount of work that goes into just the review process. But I'm really glad to see that FNNBOA does have this relationship, certainly with the municipal building officials. I will talk a little bit later about some of the opportunities for furthering education in some upcoming slides. Okay, John?
Yeah. So one of the other points why the certification became a challenge is, and it relates to the debate, do First Nation building officers do inspections for compliance review or for progress payments? And this gets more complicated because, as we discussed in our previous webinars, the authority having jurisdiction. So if the authority having jurisdiction, the council, doesn't have a bylaw to say we're enforcing the national building code or a provincial code of jurisdiction, then in fact, while the officers are trained to look at code compliance, but in fact, you're complying to make a progress payment. So is the roof on? Yes, the roof is on. Was the roof installed properly? Well, you're going to say yes because you're looking at it. If it wasn't, you don't have any power to say to fix it per se because you don't have stop work orders. So, but the roof is on, so there's a progress payment, and that gets to the core of the issue of why education and training is paramount for First Nation building officers, but it also becomes a challenge because of the role and responsibility isn't clearly defined. Because right now, as most of the comprehensive agreements, you only have to be qualified versus certified or professional. And in our industry, qualified, certified, and professional have different meanings. And we also joke around with Bud Jobin, who some of you may know. He passed away a few years ago. He was head of the association, but he used to go on inspections with his mother, and he would say his mother's qualified because she would look at the roof, and through Bud, she knew exactly what had to be done. So his mother was qualified. So the pizza guy was qualified. Is the roof on? Yes. So that's always became and it's still the challenge, I think, today. So, okay. Next there, please. Go ahead, Claude.
Okay, let's talk a little bit here about the current training opportunities. Part 9 and other training can be taken from provincial municipal building officials associations such as the OBOA. So again, there's a link to their website and specifically to their training. Perhaps the downside is certainly these are all fee-based training courses. OBOA is specifically one of the leaders when it came to basically training specifically to building codes for most of the, we'll say, jurisdictions right across the country. So a lot of the other provinces kind of followed suit. So again, there's part 9 training. And again, when we talk part 9, we're talking the building code language, but from a non-technical point of view, that's small buildings in housing in particular when we talk about part 9. The same applies whether it's a provincial code or even the national building code. And again, just kind of as a little bit of a follow-up, the national building code is, we'll call it the cookie cutter basic, we'll call it version of the building code, and each province can take it upon itself to basically add to it, or perhaps in some cases even modify the national building code. Again, when we get down to the provincial municipal level, again, it can be modified. So what happens in my place, Windsor, Ontario, may not be the same thing that is enforced, for example, in the city of Toronto. There are other opportunities, and again, I'm from the college system as a former professor of architecture. And when I look at the college courses across the country, there's a lot of places like John mentioned, such as SAIT or NAIT, and certainly many, many community colleges that do offer other current training opportunities, be it for example, more trade specific, construction, carpenter, even construction management, electrical, plumbing, heating, and so on. And of course, one of the big things about getting the training in the college system is certainly the opportunity to receive formal certification or a certificate of completion of these particular courses and programs. So again, that holds a lot of weight if somebody asks, well, what certificate do you hold, as opposed to, well, I've got a lot of background on how to do wiring in a house. Again, there's a huge difference, perhaps a large gap between, let's say, we'll call it hands-on experience versus more formalized training, and having taken some courses to make me a lot more proficient and knowledgeable about, let's say, electrical in general. When we take a look at Alberta, we can see there's the Alberta Safety Code training courses. And again, if we take a look across the country, perhaps I've skipped over many that perhaps is available in your province or your community area. When we talk about the home inspection side, as John mentioned, there hasn't always been, we'll call it, a very close relationship on the home inspection side with First Nations. Certainly, we know there are some home inspectors, private home inspectors, that will do inspections on reserve or in First Nation communities, but it's not a large, we'll say, volume of work per se. But when we talk about home inspection, and more specifically that provide training for inspectors, again, the colleges do offer more specific home inspection training. As an example, Inspection Support Services provides education. I'm one of the directors and part owners of Inspection Support Services. So as an example, we currently have approximately 10 students from British Columbia taking courses on building science, on plumbing, and also on electrical. And again, we offer a series of 7 courses that are more semester based, something that can be completed for a home inspector for their practical training. But I also see that same type of training certainly is very much applicable to any First Nation inspector that wants to advance their knowledge and education, particularly when it comes to, we'll call it, home inspection in general, because the same things pretty much apply whether it's on reserve or off reserve. You know, a house is made up of many systems and components, and understanding the issues or the safety parts of it, or what's good, or maybe what's not so good, is certainly important as far as education is concerned. As I mentioned, we offer courses, again, inspection support, that is. For example, Inspection Fundamentals is really an overview course of what to expect through a home inspection. So it's kind of a, well, we'll say a little bit of a, we'll call it, taste of all the different courses combined into one. Just to kind of give you a general idea, that Inspection Fundamentals is 40 hours of training. The plumbing, heating, electrical, and structural, and the building science courses are 80 hours of training. So again, when we start looking at that, that gets fairly deep and intensive into topics. Again, let's pick on the issue of electrical. What's safe, what's not safe, what's good wiring, and what to look for, especially when it comes to defects or deficiencies or safety issues, especially when we talk about electrical. Other courses, for example, indoor air quality, or way back, going back towards 2006, I was involved with inspecting existing dwellings. This was a CMH course originally, and I was sort of the project manager in doing the update for inspecting existing dwellings. So again, a CMHC course on inspecting existing dwellings. And I know many First Nation inspectors have probably taken that course. And certainly there are others perhaps that should really consider taking that course. On the larger scale, though, we also take a look at commercial inspection. So although we start talking about home inspections, there are some companies and inspectors out there that will get involved with doing larger buildings, just not, we'll call it, small buildings or housing. So for example, you know, maybe the corner store, perhaps a church or a community center, larger buildings in general. Again, there's a link there to Inspection Support's education if you are interested.
Before you move on,
excuse me,
Claude, so I think an important point here is, you know, the length of these courses, right? So FNNBOA, you know, we give our webinars for an hour. We give a very high level, very high overview. but the intensity of these courses are 80 hours, and I encourage the inspectors to take these courses, right? Because for First Nation building officers, you are not only inspecting the municipal building official hat, you're also doing inspection of existing dwellings and all these courses. So they're equally important to take and to pay for these trainings. I believe you should approach your council because they have an education budget to pay for these courses. So you shouldn't have to be paying for these out of your pocket, but if not, you should consider doing it because it provides more background to make you a better person in terms of inspections.
Yeah. Thank you, John. That's important, and perhaps another good thing is as an example, right now, currently, for example, on Wednesday night, I do a webinar. We'll call it a Skype session on building science for approximately an hour with all my students. So basically, what they do is they have all the course notes available to them online. I take about an hour to go through building science, and we talk about similar things like I would show in a short little 1 hour clip of building science. As I mentioned, 80 hours of this, but as far as training is concerned, but uh, in that 1 hour, I'm probably going to talk about some of the defects and what is building science and what are some of the issues with, for example, indoor air quality, mold, or ghosting, or a lot of different terms or things that can happen. The other beauty about the online training is 7 courses are offered for under $1,000, or individually the courses are roughly about $150 each, which is not too expensive. Because I know some of the, having taught in the college system, for example, some of the college courses are $300, $400, $500, let's say, for that building science or electrical course. So again, some of the private training providers out there certainly can do it a lot more cost effective because there's less, we'll say, hands in the pot trying to take and make money. So again, just some food for thought, like John mentioned about furthering your education, certainly more in depth and a better understanding. Okay, I'll move on.
Yep.
Specific First Nation training. Well, FNNBOA provides educational webinars, as we know, on a number of topics. I probably can count, oh geez, John, what would you guess? 60, 70 courses at least we provide through webinars?
We have at least, plus we've had the Home on the Res, the podcast, which provides further insight. So plus we have a lot of documents that we've put up to provide, help in terms of education. So yeah, we've taken the lead, and even before COVID, we were targeting to do webinars because we believe it's efficient, they're effective, and people can always look at them anytime. And if we have a hands-on, and those that have participated will receive the invitations to do the hands-on as well whenever we start doing it. So, but yeah, we put out a lot of webinars.
Yes, I think, and I think, certainly, John and I were talking earlier of basically creating a, we'll call it almost like a library of information. Certainly, there's times when we get emails indicating, well, geez, I would really like to take that estimating course. Well, we offered it starting well over a year ago, and of course, we've had some additional webinars on more specific advanced topics or other topics such as costing versus estimating. So at least getting that information out in a nice format where individuals can go into it and take a look at it and get some nice clippets, short little brief, roughly 1 hour webinars on a variety of topics. One of the other big projects I've been working on with John is introducing a digital badge, really for digital certification for continuing education, available late fall 22, perhaps early 23. Based on existing webinars with additional course materials and questions. So as we've indicated here, there's a large volume of webinars we've put together over the last couple of years. But a few that we thought we would sort of kick off as part of the digital certification and digital badge project is one on specifically construction estimating. There seems to be a high level of interest there. Certainly construction administration, another key topical area. So that's a huge topic within itself. Maintenance and repairs, again, serving certainly communities at a different level. There's always maintenance repairs to do to housing in general or buildings in general. Another one more specific, I guess, regarding inspections and reviews, how to conduct inspections, what are the expectations and so on. And even dealing with contractors and build projects. You know, it could be local contractors or we'll call it out of community contractors. How can all these projects be handled and how do we get the best results? And certainly project costs and procurement management. So again, these are some of our initial, we'll call it initial thoughts on this. Certainly we can see this could expand quite rapidly based on the amount of interest and certainly the opportunity to expand this. So maybe just to back up a minute, what is a digital badge? Well, digital badges seem to be the hot trend these days, and certainly so is digital certification. Where, for example, on your little, let's say, business or website, a person clicks on that digital badge, and it's basically almost like, we'll call it your diploma, that you've completed this course successfully, that you're very knowledgeable. These are some of the, let's say, the learning outcomes that have been achieved. And certainly it's almost like, we'll call it the modern day CV or basically resume for an individual. And certainly kind of a little, we'll call it almost like badge type approach that you can attach to any type of document. As you can see, the last point on this slide here is different badge levels will be offered. So for example, some will be at a basic level, perhaps a more a mid-level, or certainly at a higher level. So again, for example, let's pick on just construction estimating. Will it be a basic course or something more advanced? And certainly when it comes to construction administration, is it something just simply for a person in the office versus a whole more global project management approach where it's the whole larger picture? So again, just some specific First Nation trainings that we're trying to focus on, certainly the webinars, and combined with this digital badge project, I think you'll see that great opportunities for education for not just First Nation, but communities in general. So let's talk about some specific First Nation training. So for example, I indicated earlier, these will be initially online courses. It's going to include combination of self-directed studies and webinars. So as I mentioned earlier, I've been involved with inspection support for, oh geez, probably going back to the year 2000. And we were very heavily involved in the college system with doing online training for home inspectors. So I've got a large depth of background when it comes to online training and certainly the self-directed studies and certainly webinars in general. We find the combination of the two helps reinforce the learning and education to make for better, we'll call it participants, but not just better participants, but certainly better individuals qualified that have taken the education in these specific topics. So as an example, if we start looking at construction estimating, I was talking earlier where some of our ISS, Inspection Support Service courses, are between 40 to 80 hours. So these are some ballpark estimates of what we're probably targeting time-wise for example, these specific trainings. So for example, construction estimating, 40 hours. estimating from start to the bid process. Construction administration, another 40 hours, administrative controls from the bid to the project completion process. Maintenance and repairs, we see that approximately 16 hours. Inspection reviews, 16 hours. In contractors and build projects, roughly 24 hours, more or less. And certainly the project cost and procurement management, 16 hours. And again, topics such as budgets, purchasing tenders, bidding process, forms, contracts, and so on. Kind of to give you a little bit of a taste of what is going to be in each individual course, and certainly kind of the time frames.
And we could probably turn some of those into digital badges down the road. So we would, fix them up and gear them towards First Nations and apply digital badges.
Exactly. So here's a sample outline. For example, I've been working on construction estimating. So one of our lead off ones certainly would be the construction estimating. You can see over to the left-hand side, the unit, the topics, the type of assessments that will be involved, and kind of the activities, the assignments, the readings, and the webinars. So for example, we can see the very first is going to be an introduction to estimating, and some readings on estimating and bidding process. And you'll notice there's an estimating webinar number 1. So this would be the online interactive session with the course participants to get them comfortable with what is the course all about, what to expect, and what they're going to be learning, and what are going to be the outcomes when they complete this particular course. Then you can see there's a whole list of topics. So I like to break it down into modules or units. Estimating resources, drawings and specs, general requirements, quantity takeoffs, and so on as we go down the list of topics. And again, the assessments. So there's going to be some quizzes. Do you understand what you read, basically? So again, if you have read the material, the quizzes should be fairly easy. In a lot of cases, what we do with the quiz is you can take multiple attempts. So maybe you get 5 out of 10 on the first one. But you know what? Go back and review it and get 10 out of 10 on the next attempt. On, for example, architectural drawings and specifications and on construction materials. So again, you can see that we try and encourage the growth and development of gaining that education, certainly on the topic for this particular course of construction estimating. So this is just one example. So you can see, for example, the number of units, the topics that are going to be involved, the type of assessments, and without getting into a lot of detail, more or less kind of a general breakdown of a sample outline for construction estimating. Well, certification for First Nation inspectors. So as an example, I talked earlier a little bit about the home inspectors, and this gets into a little more specific. So for example, this is where some of the issues lie with the certification process of a First Nation individual inspector versus a home inspector. So as an example, individuals that are involved in the home inspection and that have completed technical training may apply for certifications such as the NHICC. Again, I'm involved in that organization, National Home Inspector Certification Council. So we are recognized, the NHICC, for licensing of home inspectors in both the province of BC and Alberta. The other provinces, by the way, all the others do not have we'll call it a legal framework that actually controls who can call themselves a home inspector. BC and Alberta have such a regulation. But let's take a look at the baseline. So certification is based on technical courses specifically to home inspection of 250 hours. So you can see that maybe 3 of those 80-hour courses get you a 240, but you're going to need a little bit more than just 3 courses. You need 250 hours as a minimum. You have to successfully complete a national home inspection exam. Again, in BC, it's 70% on that exam. In Alberta, it's 80%. And you also need to perform a specific number of home inspections to a specific standard. So for example, there's a number of home inspection standards out there. Really, what does a home inspector do? What is their scope of work, so to speak? So again, there's a specific number. And that could be anywhere from, for example, again, let's use BC as an example. You must complete 10 home inspections under the, we'll call it supervision of a registered home inspector. That's one who's licensed. And I guess get good comments and favorable recognition by that home inspector, or maybe multiple home inspectors, to collect 50 hours of supervised home inspection training with at least 10 home inspections. So as an example, when it comes to a credential, in the NHICC process, we have two, actually we actually have three. There's what they call the NHI-P, the provisional, okay? In the NHI, which requires equivalency to Consumer Protection BC in order to get your home inspector license. So you can see that the process involves certainly certification based on technical courses and successful completion of them. Again, even the passing grade in each course is 70%. As I mentioned, the passing grade for the exam, we'll call it the practical, the field supervised inspections to see if the individual is actually performing to a good standard to perform a home inspection, eventually to attain a license. Of course, the other thing that isn't in here that I just thought about right now is they also must carry errors in omission insurance. So in other words, perhaps they might get sued for an error or omission. So again, there is a bit of a risk factor. Again, John and I thank you for your time and consideration. John, any closing comments? I guess at that point, none. Again, I thank you. John thanks you. Hopefully, if you have any questions, please contact us. Here's our points of contact.
Thank you, everyone. Okay.
Are we okay, John?
Yep. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Recording.